Good evening. Welcome to the Town of Avon Advisory Plan Commission meeting. If you are interested in having a copy of the agenda, they are available on the tables to the right of the audience. We will be conducting business as outlined on the agenda. From time to time, the board may deviate from the agenda. As president of this body, I will inform those in attendance of any deviations. This meeting is being recorded for the public record. Because of this, we request that personal conversations are kept to a minimum and that all cell phones are set to vibrate. All phone calls should be taken outside of the chambers. If you are interested in commenting during the public hearing portion of the Commission's deliberations, please sign up on the sheets located on the tables to the right of the audience. When your name is called, please step forward to the podium and state your name and address for the record. Please address your comments to the board and not to staff or to the petitioner. Your comments should relate directly to the case at hand. During the conduct of the public hearing portion of the Commission's deliberations, the petitioner will have 10 minutes to present their case to the Commission. Remonstrators will have 10 minutes to present objections to the petition. Persons in support of the petition other than the petitioner will have 10 minutes to present support for the petition. Finally, the petitioner will close the public hearing portion of the presentation with a 5-minute rebuttal period. Excuse me. I'm not allergic to you, I promise. Once the public hearing is closed, no additional testimony will be heard unless it is solicited by members of the Commission during the question and answer phase of the Commission's deliberations. Subdivision plat and development plan petitions are ministerial requests, meaning that if the proposal meets the requirements set forth in the town's development ordinances, the Plan Commission must approve the request. In the interest of transparency, state law requires that the Plan Commission hold a public hearing, even if the development proposal must be approved. Responses to public comments and questions may be given once the public hearing portion is closed. We understand that there may be several persons who wish to speak. In order to keep the meeting running in a timely fashion, we would request that you not repeat previous comments. Thank you for your assistance in facilitating a respectful, fair, and timely meeting. Again, welcome to our meeting, and please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Where's the agenda? Roll call.
Catherine Ransberg.
Present.
Paul Guggenberger.
Here.
Bill Reed.
Here.
Jennifer Spencer.
Here.
Greg Zusen.
Here.
Dave Kaufman.
Here.
Andrew Rottenbrand. Here.
We have a quorum, and I think this would be time to say welcome to our newest member. Moving on to approval of the meeting minutes from August 26th. Has everyone had an opportunity to read the minutes? And are there any corrections, edits, questions?
I make a motion to approve the minutes as presented. Second.
Having heard a motion and a second, we will now take a voice vote. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes carry. Meeting minutes are approved. We're now entering into the public comment section of the meeting. This is an opportunity for you who are present to speak to the commission about anything that is not already on tonight's agenda. If it's on tonight's agenda, then just wait for that agenda item to come over and you can speak then. But if there's something else you'd like to speak to, now's your opportunity to come forward and make your thoughts known. Is there anybody who'd like to speak about something not on tonight's agenda? Okay. The public hearing comment now, a public comment section is now closed, and we move on to the request for continuances or agenda modifications.
Thank you. The first request is for ZA 24-05, Silver Spring rezone. As you're aware, this has been continued numerous times for a traffic study. The study is still not back yet. The scope of the study was changed a little bit by our Department of Public Works Director, and they have not been able, the entity doing this traffic study has not been able to complete it and get it back to us yet. So we are requesting a continuance to your October 26th hearing.
And this is October 26th or October 28th?
Sorry, October 28th.
Thank you. And this is a request from staff?
Correct.
And just for public knowledge, staff can make an unlimited number of requests for continuances on any agenda item. Any questions for staff about this request for continuance? There's no questions or discussion. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. I move that we continue ZA 2405 Silver Springs to the October 28th Plan Commission meeting.
I'll second.
Having heard a motion in a second, we'll now take a vote.
Ransberg,
For?
Guckenberger,
4.
Reed,
4.
Spencer, Zuzen,
4.
Kaufman,
4.
Rockerbrand.
Motion carries. The Silver Springs rezone agenda item is now going to be heard on October 28th.
Thank you. Additionally, staff would draw your attention to ZA 24-07, Meyer rezoning. This is at the northwest corner of 200 North and 900 East. There is a remnant parcel that is not annexed into the town that Meyer has acquired and would like to include in this rezoning petition, which increases the acreage, which has to be noticed in the newspaper and mailed notice. Therefore, this petition must be continued to the October 28th, 2024 hearing to provide for that additional legal notice.
And this is a request from staff?
Correct.
Thank you. Any questions for staff regarding this particular request for continuance? If there's no questions or discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion to continue ZA 24-07, the Meyer rezone, to our October 28th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting.
Do we have a second? Having had a motion and a second, we will now take a vote on the motion.
Ransberg,
For?
Guckenberger,
4.
Reed,
4.
Spencer, 4. Zuzen,
4.
Kaufman,
4.
Rockerbrand.
Motion carries. The Meyer rezone ZA 2407 will now be heard on the October 28th Plan Commission meeting.
Thank you. Finally, staff would draw your attention to an item under new business, which is MAP P 24-05 Hope Landing Primary Plat. As you're aware from your staff report, there are 4 waiver requests, including with this petition. And it wasn't until earlier today that staff was made aware that the legal notice that was mailed out to surrounding property owners did not include those waivers, and it's required that they be part of the public notice. Therefore, staff is requesting a continuance to October 28th so that new legal notice can be provided for that hearing.
And although this information came from the petitioner, it is a staff request.
Correct.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion about the motion to continue MAP P2405? There's no discussions or questions. We'll entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion. I move that we continue map P 2405 Hope Landing primary plat to the October 28th meeting.
Second.
Having heard a motion and a second, we'll now take a vote.
Ransberg,
For?
Guggenberger,
4.
Reed,
4.
Spencer. 4. Zuzen,
4.
Kaufman,
4.
Rockabran.
The ayes carry, the motion, or the ayes have it, no nays. The motion is carried, and MAP 2405 Hope Landing primary plat will be heard at the October 28th meeting. So we are now down to one more item. So we're going to have a much shorter meeting. I hope, we'll see. Staff.
Thank you, President Ransberg, members of the commission. DPR 24-12 for Washington Township Fire Department, Station 145. This is an approval of a development, requesting approval of a development plan review along with 3 waivers. Property is located at 7040 Governor's Row, the northeast corner of South Avon Avenue and Governor's Row. This is lot 4 in the Governor's Row Road extension at Turner Trace subdivision. It's a little under 2 acres. It is zone C2. The parcel is unimproved. And just as background, this petition, you may recall, was continued from last month's hearing to this hearing to allow for the petitioner to send revised mailed notice describing the requested waivers. So the development plan review would allow for the development of a 16,000 square foot fire station with accessory parking, utilities, et cetera. The 3 waivers, waiver A is a reduction of the north buffer yard to 15 feet, where a 30-foot minimum buffer yard is required between a commercial development and residential zoning. Waiver B is to eliminate the requirement to provide foundation plantings adjacent to the south side of the building when a 5-foot wide planting strip is required around the perimeter of the building. And then waiver C is to provide for a full driveway access onto Avon Avenue, located a little more than 100 feet from an adjacent intersection, which would be Governor's Row to the south, where a 400-foot separation is required by ordinance. Just to show you the site here. So this is Avon Avenue. This is Governor's Row. You have 150 South down here. This is the site outlined in blue. You have C2 commercial zoning to the east and to the south. The site to the south is undeveloped. To the east is improved with a daycare facility. To the north and west, you have residential zoning and residential improvements. You do have one thing we'll talk about a little bit is this access that runs through the subject site. That's an access easement that runs in favor of the daycare, allowing them access. The daycare has another driveway to Governor's Row over here, but this access easement allows traffic to flow through the site in either direction. Just going to kind of walk you through a few photos here. This is the subject property facing east across Avon Avenue. This is a reverse now standing on basically in the center of the property, looking back west towards Avon Avenue. This is from on the property facing south across Governor's Row to the vacant C2 site to the south. Now we're out along Avon Avenue on the existing pedestrian path adjacent to Avon Avenue facing south. Here we're on the south side of Governor's Row. The subject site would be just off to the left here. Actually, this is the existing access driveway that goes through the site to the daycare that's in the background here. And then we're facing north on Avon Avenue. The subject property would be off to the right here. This is the adjacent property to the north, and the abutting property to the north, that's their existing driveway. This little marker right here is actually the northwest corner of the property. And then now we're standing down at the southwest corner, basically at the corner of Avon Avenue and Governor's Row, facing north. So you have the whole subject site here. You can kind of see the daycare back in the distance here. And then you have this row of trees that separates the subject site from the adjacent residential property to the north. Now, I think this is the last one. We're just looking across Avon Avenue facing east towards the property. This is the subject site. Again, that's the existing daycare in the background. Here's a tree line at the north end of the site. There's that little property marker. And here's the proposed site plan. You can see this is the proposed building. This northern part is, I guess you'd call it the apparatus bay or garage where the fire trucks would be parked. This is the remainder of the building. You have a employee parking lot here proposed to the south. Again, this is that existing access easement that's already in place that leads to the daycare property to the east. So presumably the daycare customers or employees will still be able to come through either entering this way or exiting that way. And the fire trucks will actually come in off of Governor's Row, and they will enter the back of the building, and then they will exit out, coming out the front or west facade of the building to access Avon Avenue. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes, as that's subject of one of the waivers. Here are the proposed building elevations. At the top, we have this is the north facade that would face the residential property to the north. This is the west facade that would face Avon Avenue. Here at the top, you have the south facade that would face Governor's Row. And then finally, you have the east facade that would face the existing daycare property. This is I believe, the most recent landscape plan, which we believe meets the standards of the ordinance, except for the waivers that we're going to talk about in a minute or two. So for the development plan review, we try to look comprehensively at basically everything in the Unified Development Ordinance to make sure that the proposed development would meet all the elements of the UDO so that you can contemplate approving the development plan review. So just kind of running through some of those issues for you. We look at architecture. What I showed you actually is the second set of building elevations that we had. There were some revisions made after staff had some comments that a few elements of the renderings needed to be revised to meet the architectural standards in UDO 7.10, and we do believe those are now met. Off-street parking, the UDO requires 1 space per 1,000 square feet of building area for a government building, which in this case would be 16 spaces. 27 off-street spaces are proposed, so that would meet the ordinance. The site isn't located within a zoning overlay or a regulated floodplain. No signs have been submitted, but if they propose those later on, those can be reviewed administratively. The stormwater drainage plans have been approved by the town's consultant. We look at the comprehensive plan and use for a fire station, we believe, is generally consistent with the neighborhood retail designation for this area that's in the Town of Avon comprehensive plan. Landscaping and screening, we're going to talk about more when we get into the waivers here. And then the other C2 standards, we do believe that the plans would be consistent with those standards, but for the waivers. So I'm going to first talk about waiver A. It's the request for a 15-foot north buffer yard where a 30-foot buffer yard would be required between a commercially zoned property and a residentially zoned property. I will first start out by saying that staff did indicate in a pre-filing meeting with the petitioner that we would potentially be able to support the requested 15-foot buffer yard reduction. However, I also say that we don't always have as much information at a pre-filing meeting as we have once a petition gets filed and we're able to do additional research. So after the petition was filed, we visited the property, and then we noticed that there is a row of mature trees along the north property line, which caused us some concern, wondering what the impact would be of deviating from the 30-foot buffer yard to put the building 15 feet from the property line, given the presence of those mature trees. So we discussed that concern with the petitioner, and we asked them if they were planning to remove any of those trees, and made sure they were aware that the UDO requires that if, as a part of the development process, that they would be proposing to remove any trees, that they're required to submit a stamped tree survey and replacement plan as part of their development plan review filing. So the petitioner did submit a tree survey, and that tree survey, which I'm going to show you a little bit in just a minute here, it suggested that all but 3 of the existing 24 trees, and those 3, excuse me, all but 3 of the 24 trees should be removed, either due to construction impacts or due to tree condition. This exhibit from the petitioner's arborist basically shows the location of those 24 trees along this north property line. All but, I guess it's hard for me to see. Oh, I can see better over here. So there's 3 green dots. Those are the ones that the arborist recommended to be retained, and the other 21 that are red dots were all proposed to be removed, either due to condition or due to construction impact. So as you can see on this table, there's 24 trees shown here. You have the species of tree, the diameter of the tree trunk, the apparent condition, and then the recommendation. And so you have removed for all but 3 of the trees, which were actually 3 of the smallest. So you can see they're all under 10-inch diameter. And you can see that then the notes here that show that the reason that most of those trees should be removed, according to this survey from their arborist, was due to condition, and then a couple due to construction impacts. So we asked the petitioner if they could provide some more detail on the condition of those trees. Now, I will tell you that your planning staff, we are not landscape architects or arborists. In other words, we're not tree experts. But in looking at the trees, we were a little skeptical that almost all of the trees were in such bad condition that they needed to be removed. So we asked the petitioner to provide some additional detail on the specifics of those trees all being in poor condition and needing to be removed. We didn't get anything in the form of a report per se. The petitioner can certainly speak to that during their time. But they did respond with something that was labeled a tree clearance exhibit. And that indicated that they believed that only 4 of the largest trees would have their critical root zone significantly impacted, ranging from an impact of 13 to 20%. So the critical root zone is an area, obviously underground, in a circumference or a circle around the tree. Sometimes I think it corresponds with the drip line, but that's an area that it's recommended that you try to stay out of that area if you're going to preserve trees. Obviously, the best way to do that is to stay completely out of the drip line and not, cut into tree roots or have to, cut significantly branches of the trees if possible. But in our limited research, it appears that a general rule of thumb is that if you can't stay out of the root system of the trees at all, if you can impact less than 20% of the critical root zone, then if all goes well, you've got a decent chance of preserving those trees. So I'm just going to skip ahead here for a moment. So this is the tree clearance exhibit that I just referenced a moment ago. So if you look at the top of the page here, here's basically the north property line. These red circles are the diameters of the trees. And then there's this kind of an orange circle that goes around the tree. That's what this exhibit illustrated as the critical root zone. Now this magenta line, so you can see the building footprint here. Sorry, I can't keep that steady enough at this distance, but That's basically the outline of the north end of the building there. And then this magenta line is the area that they propose to disturb. So basically where they'd be doing some kind of earthwork in preparation for and to build the building. So where this orange line for the critical root zone comes around and meets that magenta line, that's where you get this dark blue line. That's the area of impact into the critical root zone. And again, what they showed was that only 4 of those large trees would have those root zones impacted, ranging from 13 to 20%. However, as staff was doing more research on this, we determined that the critical root zone is typically defined or identified as a radius of 1 foot or more for every 1 inch of tree trunk diameter. And some places look at it as 1.25 feet per inch. Some places even as much as 1.5 feet. But it seemed like everywhere that we could find regulations or definitions, it was at least 1 foot of radius for every 1 inch of tree trunk diameter. And when we looked back at this exhibit, we kind of did the math on these, and it looked like what they were showing for the critical root zone was actually only about 8 inches or 2/3 of a foot for every inch of the tree trunk diameter. So, we mentioned that concern to the petitioner. They submitted another tree exhibit which shows the impact would be greater to the critical root zone of those trees, ranging from 27 to 37%. So this is that revised exhibit that was then submitted. And again, you can see, similar to this exhibit, same kind of concept going on, but they drew the critical root zone at 1 foot per inch for each of those trees. And now you can see the area of overlap significantly greater for basically all of the trees that would be in the area of the disturbed area. And the petitioner submitted this table. There's 2 tables here, actually. The table at the top then shows these numbers that I mentioned, where the area of impact ranges from a little under 27% to a little under 37.5%. Now, the petitioner also provided this table at the bottom, where I believe, they will make a case, and I'll let them speak to that. They can probably do a better job of that, but they believe there's a case to be made that the real impact is lesser because some of the areas of disturbed area, if you go back to this map, and that's basically the area between the magenta line, I don't know, it's hard to really see with all these lines here, but the area between the magenta line and the building footprint or this driveway that comes out to Avon Avenue. The area is north of there, but still in the disturbed area. They feel like a case can be made that portion of the root systems won't be significantly impacted because they're indicating that they won't be excavating deeper than 18 inches. And they believe that most of the critical roots will be below 18 inches. Staff has some concern that any excavation work and moving equipment through the area, it's our understanding, has a negative impact on root systems, even if the roots don't get cut due to compaction, which eliminates air and water getting to those roots. So although the petitioner believes that the impact will be limited, without a stamp plan from a design professional that's really giving us something more to go on and giving us an assessment of the likelihood of the survival of those impacted trees, we're concerned that, as proposed, that we're at a significant risk of losing the majority of those large trees. And again, those trees that are most impacted are the largest ones out there. Those are the ones that are between 3 and 4 feet in diameter. So for those reasons, we're concerned as to whether the findings for waiver A would be met, specifically that the overall development plan would be enhanced by the reduced buffer yard that the proposal provides. That it wouldn't detract from the existing appearance of the surrounding area if those trees can't be preserved, and that the proposal provides improved site design characteristics, including tree preservation, as required in the findings. It's also staff's opinion that waiver A could probably be withdrawn and that the required 30-foot north buffer yard could be provided if the north row of proposed parking was eliminated with some or all of those spaces being replaced. Again, going back to the site plan, again, I said they were required to have 16 spaces. They would like to have 27 as shown here. So they've got a row of 14 here on the south and then 13 on the north. And we mentioned this to the petitioner, and they did submit to us this alternate site plan, which I want to make clear, they're not proposing this as far as I'm aware. I think they were just trying to show us the limits of what they could do. So the petitioner is going to, I believe, indicate to you that they're limited in how much asphalt or hard surfacing that they can add to the property, because as I mentioned, they've got stormwater drainage approval, but I believe they will indicate to you that they're right at almost the maximum extent of what they can have hard surfaced on the property without having to do additional stormwater drainage infrastructure improvements. So what the petitioner was showing you here is if they took away that north row of parking that would have been here, they would be able to move the building down and meet the required 30-foot setback and buffer yard. But they're showing that these are the amount of areas, I guess, that they can add in hard surfacing without going over what would require them to do additional stormwater drainage. So they would add 2 spaces there, 5 spaces here. I think that would put them at 21 spaces. They certainly would like to get to 27. We have, staff has mentioned to the petitioner on several occasions that we thought that they could add parking spaces here east of the building, perhaps on either side of this existing access aisle, or even over in this area west of the building. So to kind of demonstrate that, we just put together a couple sketches and sent them to the petitioner last week. And I apologize that some of the outline on here is a little bit faint, but this is again the outline of the building. So we just basically took that alternate plan that the petitioner sent over to us, which still has these 5 spaces here and those 2 spaces here. I will note that when they go over 14 spaces in a row, the ordinance requires that they put in a landscape island to break that up. So they would actually lose 1 space there. So instead of, to comply with the ordinance, they wouldn't have 21, they'd have 20. But they could add their 2 ADA reserved spaces here on the west. And then we drew in where they could add 5 spaces on the east side of the building that would maneuver into this access aisle. And that would give them the 27 spaces that they proposed. Now, I know they're going to, one of their concerns is that this would add additional hard surfacing to the property, which would apparently require them to do more stormwater drainage improvements. So we looked at other opportunities where they might offset that by removing some hard surfacing. They have this walkway in front of the building. I mean, it's not for us to say that they shouldn't have that running from their driveway towards the front door, but I mean, this is not an area for anyone to park. So we thought, and actually I will, should give credit to Mr. Ralston, who I think is going to speak during public comment, because that was his idea to remove that. But one thing I do need to note is that we did add a walkway here because in review of this along the way, we realized that the UDO requires that they have a connection between their internal walkways and the perimeter sidewalks or paths, basically to provide pedestrian connection from the public right of way to the building. So they would need to add a little bit of sidewalk or walkway there. But we also looked at, this is a 3-bay garage essentially. And this driveway is proposed as being about 60 feet wide all the way out to the street. So we thought there would be an opportunity to shave off some of the hard surfacing here and narrow this opening a little bit. And then also at the back, so of course, I said the trucks come out here this way, going either direction. When they come back, they come in on Governor's Row and they come in through the back. Again, this is 60 feet wide here. You know, we know that we're pretty sure a fire truck can maneuver in less than a 60-foot width to get to the garage. So we thought maybe, you know, there'd be an opportunity to remove some hard surfacing there if that helps them out. I don't want to belabor the point too much, just to show this is just another sketch we also sent them. It's very similar, but because the petitioner had told us repeatedly that they did not want to have parking spaces that maneuver into this access aisle because the daycare customers come down this aisle and they didn't want to have that conflict. We looked at another way to draw it. Again, very similar, except instead of 5 spaces here, we only fit 4 spaces here because that's probably all that can fit there. So then they end up with 26 spaces instead of 27. We actually took this, and again, this is just a sketch. So, you know, an engineer would have to actually take this and do the exact calculations. But I measured this out and made sure we had a 30-foot width there. Again, this is a one-way aisle. So, you know, we felt like a fire truck could probably maneuver through there and get to any of the 3 bays. And then same on the front, come out. And I don't think they're all 3 going to come out at the same time and drive out to the street, you know, in tandem. So that we thought they could come out here, they could eliminate some pavement there. And again, so by our rough calculations, these are the numbers that would be added by adding this walkway, these 2 spaces and those 4 spaces, that we'd be adding about 1,650 square feet of pavement. Here would be taking out about 750 back here, taking out about 1,000 there, and then maybe 250 here, which would be 2,000. So we look at a net decrease in hard surfacing, and they'd be getting 26 of the 27 spaces. You know, we're not here to say this is exactly how they should do it. We're just looking at this and basically sketching it out to say it looks like there are alternatives to what have been proposed. And when there are alternatives, you know, we need to try to pursue those, rather than granting a waiver that, you know, could have negative impact on the adjoining property and the existing trees there. So for that reason, we just really don't feel that we can support waiver A at this time. Now, who's ready for waiver B? So waiver B is for elimination of the foundation plantings on the south side of the building. Just to back up real quick to go to the landscape plan for a second. So just so we're all clear, so there are foundation plantings here, here, and here around the perimeter of the building. Obviously, you can't, you know, put them where there's a driveway. But where they're not showing those foundation plantings, where they're asking for that waiver, is here along the south side of the building. There is a requirement to do plantings around the perimeter of a parking lot. So you can see they've got that here on the west, the south, and the east. And so where a parking lot adjoins the building, you don't have to do both the parking lot plantings and the foundation plantings. Just one suffices. But in their proposed plan here, they don't have space to do the foundation plantings along the south side. So that's the area of the waiver there. They do have these plantings along the south side of the parking lot that would separate the parking lot from Governor's Row. Getting back to waiver B. We do believe that the landscaping between the parking lot and Governor's Row would visually obscure and offset the lack of foundation plantings. If there's limited space, we would prefer to see the landscaping be provided at the exterior of the site, screening the parking lot from public view, rather than be at the foundation of the building and then not have landscaping between the parking lot and the public right of way. So we believe that this proposed waiver would not create conditions detrimental to public health, safety, and welfare. We do believe it would be harmonious with the purpose and intent of the C2 district, that it would enhance the overall development of budding streetscapes, neighborhoods, and surrounding areas, and would not produce an impractical site design or detract from the surrounding area. So waiver C, finally, is to allow for a full access driveway onto Avon Avenue that's would be a little over 100 feet separated from the existing full access intersection with Governor's Row, where a 400-foot separation is required. Just going back to the site plan. So again, this is the access point that would be onto Avon Avenue. This is the existing intersection with Governor's Row, which does provide full access. So there's a different standard if it was just a right in, right out. But from Governor's Row, you can go left or right. You can make a left turn in from southbound Avon Avenue. So this, because the fire trucks would be able to come out and go left or right across Avon Avenue, it's considered a full access, and it's required to be 400 feet from this existing access point. Now, we do think this is quite a bit different than pretty much any other full access point for a number of reasons. One, it's not open to the public, so you won't have the public going in and out of it. Also, importantly, it will be one-way exit only. So you won't have, the fire trucks presumably will not be coming up and trying to back in on Avon Avenue, since they can go around and enter the rear of the building. So the impact on traffic on Avon Avenue should be extremely limited. The town's Department of Public Works is supportive of the request because there would be inclusion of flashing beacons for each direction on Avon Avenue. So for those reasons, we do believe this meets the findings. It wouldn't be detrimental to the public health, safety, or general welfare, nor be injurious to adjacent property. It wouldn't contradict the intent of the design standards or the purpose of the regulations. And we don't think it's due to conditions applicable generally to other properties, because this is a unique situation, a unique proposal, and so it would enhance the proposed development. So in conclusion, we are supportive of waivers B and C, but we're unable to recommend approval of waiver A. Therefore, we're unable to support DPR 2412 at this time as proposed, with waiver A included. If the commission were to be inclined to make a motion to approve waiver A.
Excuse me, ma'am. Ma'am. Could you please turn your phone off?
So,
Could you please turn your phone off?
sorry.
Thank you.
So again, in conclusion, if the commission were inclined to make a motion to approve waiver A and then vote on the development plan review, we would ask that it be subject to a condition requiring a stamped tree preservation plan stamped by a design professional, indicating that they would be able to preserve the existing trees and showing how those would be preserved and protected throughout the development process, and that be submitted for review and approval prior to issuance of building permit. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have.
Before we take questions, I'd like to ask our esteemed council to provide us, just also for the benefit of those who are here in the audience, this is an approval, this is a request for a development plan approval with waivers. We cannot approve the development plan unless we approve the waivers first. Is that correct?
That's correct. And if the development plan complies, then it's a ministerial approval. Since there are waivers are discretionary. So we need to, you have discretion on the waivers. You have your factors in front of you. So when you get time to vote, you'll vote on waivers first, and then you'll vote on the DPR after you've made a decision on each of the three waivers.
But if we have not approved all three waivers, we cannot go forward of voting on the DPR, or is that correct? Incorrect?
Well, if you agree with the staff, that you'd be forced to deny the DPR because it would not be compliant with your ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure we all understood how this process works. Questions for staff?
So on waiver C, and I guess this is tied into waiver A. So one is that we would normally not get I'm going to make an assumption here, support from staff or Public Works to have a driveway cut this close to another intersection. Would that be probably correct, or a full access as we're talking about here?
Yeah, if it was full access, open to the public, two-way traffic, something that would generate significant at all traffic other than just emergency vehicles exiting the site, then yeah, I would suspect that in most cases, I don't want to really speak too much in hypotheticals because,
Okay.
when we look at variances and waivers, we look at each site, each request individually on its merits. But it's probably safe to say that there would be more concern, certainly, if we were looking at a similar waiver request and it was open to the public with two-way traffic,
Okay.
both entering and exiting.
So then as a follow-up, if the alternative design that you propose to the petitioner, which would move the building further south, I assume that would move the drive further south. So now the 108 distance gets reduced by whatever distance that everything shifts down to the south. So now we're even closer between that intersection.
Well, it depends on how they would redesign the site, because if I can refer back to this drawing, so the distance for the separation is actually, it's not, it's measured from the edge of the driveway down to the intersection. Basically, if there was a stop bar, if there's not a stop bar here because traffic doesn't stop on Avon Avenue. But right now that 108 feet is measured from basically about here down to here. So if they redesigned the site and took out some of this asphalt, or I guess it's concrete, but some of this hard surfacing to narrow this driveway width down to 30 feet, without even moving the building, then they've already moved the driveway 30 feet away. So if they then move the building 15 feet down and everything had to shift, it would still be 15 feet farther from Governor's Row than the current proposal.
Okay, so then help from Dan on waivers. Can we impose conditions on waivers?
Yes, you may. Since it's discretionary approval, you can post conditions on any waiver that you're willing to grant.
So one of the things that I'm looking at this talking about safety here and having a full access drive, a cut that's within 400 feet, which you don't normally do, that we may, and something that we can talk with the petitioner about as we have discussion too, that prohibit the ingress on the full access drive, that it can only be egress, if my terms correct here. So nothing is allowed coming off of Avon Avenue going into the drive. It must go through Governor's Row. Now, enforcing that, I would be looking for staff's help on that, because I would hope that fire department, they already have the plans. I wouldn't think this would be an issue, but that would keep any other people coming into that, accessing that drive, as well as any design. We put a condition that it's at least 108 feet as the design here, because again, I'm concerned with having a full access drive when we really never get that recommended, fairly rarely get that recommendation on that.
If I might comment on that, I would say that the support from Department of Public Works is contingent on it being exit only and being posted exit only with do not enter signs facing Avon Avenue. So that's that's a condition of DPW's approval or recommendation of approval for it. So we would expect, even absent a condition from the commission, that it would have do not enter signs posted there to send a message that there should be no traffic entering from Avon Avenue.
Okay, thank you.
But at some point in time, somebody has to enforce it, no matter if we put signs there or not. Well, I want to thank staff. It sounds like you've tried to work alternate drawings, alternate plans to make this work. And when I look at waivers, I look at compromising of waivers, and I don't really see a compromise here. But we'll let them make their presentation.
Are there any further questions for staff?
Yeah, how does noise factor in to something like this, being neighbored to a daycare and stuff like that? Does that factor in at all to any aspect of this? It seems like alarms going off, loud alarms going off next to a daycare on a regular basis would be detrimental to that.
Yeah.
Next to it.
This is a platinum land use case, so remember, our DPR, we're not talking about use, we're just looking at design.
Mhm.
We're talking about design, not use. So we're just looking at the actual design of the streets, building placement, that sort of thing. What you're talking about are use issues that could have been considered at a rezone, or if this were a DPR, it could have been considered at the design phase, but that's really not really a factor here.
Okay. The reason I was wondering is like we were also talking about the tree buffer and stuff like that. And
Yeah, that's a design issue, though.
that's more of a design issue rather than ordinance. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Rear yard setback requirement.
I'm glad that question was asked because that reminded me of another question I had as far as the use of the drive to the east by the daycare in conjunction with use by the fire department, which seems like there'd be potential safety issue there of traffic going through the daycare, which in the mornings, the evenings, and if there's any activity with the fire department. I'm concerned, and maybe I would like to know more, and I'd be looking for the petition to help us with that. Seems like that would be something we wouldn't really want to see.
I can just comment to say that, the existing access easement is there. We're not able to ask the petitioner to eliminate that as part of their DPR approval request. And I will also say that, I'm not trying to contradict you, but I guess that's a question for the petitioner to answer as far as the potential conflicts. We didn't think that there would be that much traffic on that access aisle that it would prohibit, having parking spaces back out onto there like we showed on this sketch. Much like in any commercial parking lot, you have traffic that's getting from one part of a commercial development to another that often has to go down a parking aisle. And from staff's perspective, I don't think that we would be concerned that there would be, fire trucks driving through there that often, that there'd be that much conflict with drivers coming from the adjacent site to the east. But again, as Dan said, at some point that becomes a use issue, and this, fire station is a permitted use here,
Okay.
being zone C2.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
How do you determine when it's a design versus use? Is there a general rule of thumb? Like, I think when we see design plans, we talk about like light bleeding over to the neighbors and stuff like that. Isn't sound bleeding over to the neighbors? Isn't there a design of how you? Yes, it is.
Okay.
How you contain that kind of thing. How do you differentiate? I guess that's what I'm struggling with.
I would just say that if you're talking about, characteristics that are inherently specific to a particular type of use. So if there's a question about, noise that comes from a fire station and how that's going to impact surrounding properties, as opposed to something specific to the development, the physical characteristics of the development, like where the building is, where the landscaping is. The former would be more of a use issue, that you're talking about something inherent to a permitted use. that wouldn't necessarily be present for another permitted use, right? Like a daycare wouldn't have alarms and sirens and that kind of thing. Now, I think you could make the case certainly that, you know, if you're dealing with a waiver to reduce a landscape buffer yard, then, you know, perhaps you might be concerned that the reduction in that landscape buffer yard is going to have a negative impact because of noise that would come from this site. But I don't think you'd want to consider just specifically that this use has loud noises and therefore that, you know, that's a concern from the standpoint of approving the DPR. Dan, did you want to comment any further on that?
Okay, again, I was confused because it seems like we try to control in the design the amount of light that escapes, and so it seems like sound also escapes based on the design. So
Yeah, and again, if that's a concern, because they're asking for a waiver to reduce a buffer yard, and you think that being 15 feet closer or having an impact on the existing landscaping that's there is going to cause a negative impact, then I think that can be a legitimate concern.
thank you.
Any further questions for staff?
Just to follow up, your last question leads me in a different direction. Again, at the DPR level, the question before the commission is whether the plans comply with your ordinance. And so we could have an ordinance that said, for all fire stations, you have to comply with the following noise regulations. We have some of those for some other types of uses. But if we don't have those regulations, you have seen this before in rezones where you are concerned about outside intercoms and other activity, maybe loading docks at night, and you have imposed conditions to limit those sorts of noise producing activities. Again, at the rezone level, you have discretion. So you can ask or impose. However, in a DPR, if they brought a fully compliant plan to you and asked for no waivers, then noise would never come up. Because we don't have a regulation for that. And we also particularly don't have a regulation limiting the noise of fire stations. And that's why usually we work at it so hard, especially industrial uses, on noise, because it's really kind of difficult to have one standard for everything. The town, of course, also does have a noise ordinance. It's not really a zoning thing. It's more of just a general regulation. And we've enforced that from time to time. But I just think that that's the difference between where you find yourself in a DPR and where you find yourself in a rezone, is your role is more limited into what you can even inquire about.
Okay, that makes sense to me. So basically in a rezone, that would be when you'd say, I want to limit the use and say, you can't have a fire station here. But once it's zoned and there is no requirement, then you're talking about design. Okay, makes sense to me. Thank you.
Any further questions for staff or town council? If there are no further questions, we'll ask the petitioner to come forward.
Good evening. Chad James. Address is 135 North Pennsylvania, Suite 2800, Indianapolis, Indiana. I am the civil engineer for this project. And I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have about this project. I kind of wanted to provide a little more insight as to what's going on with the buffer, the tree buffer, and our request to encroach it, and kind of my findings that I've been presenting to the town. and kind of the calculation. So as Paul indicated, I kind of provided, let's see, it would be Exhibit F to the town just to kind of show everything that was being disturbed within the trees and their critical root zone. So kind of just trying to be 100% transparent. When you look at that, that is where you get that top table that has the 37%, the 26% that is above the 25% industry standard that our arborist has indicated. You know, if you can say below that, you are more than likely to save the tree. When you start looking into you know, what we're doing on that north side from the property line to the building to the drive, we are only cutting in that area to provide positive drainage and make sure that the adjacent property owner to the north drains onto our site, gets collected and taken to the regional detention basin down to the southeast of the property. So that's kind of what's expected, or kind of where those two tables came into play. You know, I provided an email that kind of had that narrative, but I don't think it made the packet. Going into the arborist report, so we did. Again, I have to coordinate with the arborist who was on vacation to get a signed and sealed report, which has been indicated to us that is what is needed in order to present it to you guys. We also, in that same email, had provided tree preservation, kind of a list of things that we could do to make sure that these trees are preserved while construction is going on. And I have that list, can go into details, but that was provided and in hopes of getting approved with it. But we didn't go into an actual plan because we've been trying to prove, and rightly so, that construction, the limits of construction were below the industry standard of 25%. And so that is what we were doing with those calculations. Once we provided that email and those calculations, then the conversation got changed to, okay, well, show us why you can't shift the building to the south. And so that is what then led to the next exhibit that showed, hey, if we extend to the west, we add this much impervious cover, we're only able to add 2 more parking spaces before we have to go above and beyond and add on-site detention because we go over the impervious cover. We did look at the 2 ideas that the town provided. If you go to your 2 ideas, Paul. So this first one, again, to your concern, Mr. Guckenberger, the drive that goes from that they will use off Governor's Avenue, emergency vehicles to the fire station. There will be buses, there will be parents going to daycare to pick up. The fire department did not want any parking spaces located on that drive, either to the west or the east from that perspective. If we go to number 2, the issue we have with this one is it requires another traffic safety variance that has parking spaces within the 20 feet from the intersection, and kind of provides another, again, safety issue with within the parking spaces. Going through with the impervious cover and the drive. So the fire department, we were tight on impervious cover. I went through the analysis, the auto turn, and said, hey, this is all the areas we can take out to stay underneath this curve number. And we ended up getting the drives to basically the bare minimum that they were okay with. You know, a lot of times they will pull out fire trucks all at the same time to do routine maintenance checks on those trucks. And then they also have visitors from other fire stations using emergency vehicles, whether it's trainings or something to that effect, where they need to park in areas that are not an issue or don't create hazards during emergencies. So that's kind of why you see the drives the way they are. There have been other, I'll say, requests to, make the sidewalk cobblestone or something pervious rather than concrete in order to reduce the amount of impervious cover. And it's just not, town of Avon standards. So, it's another variance that we would have to come in. We don't know if we get approved. We are, talking about negotiating or coming to common ground. One item that we did throw out there was we could reduce the parking spaces from 10 by 20 to 10 by 18. That would allow us to shift the building another 4 feet. That would reduce the amount of percentage in the critical root zone as well, even more than what you see in the bottom table there. And so, yeah, I think that answers kind of all the questions where we're at. I mean, there have been numerous emails between us and town of Avon trying to figure it out, but I think it all comes down to that public drive and the safety concern that we do not want parking spaces on it with vehicles driving through there, buses driving through there, emergency vehicles. We'd prefer to have the public and firefighters parking spaces to the south. We're providing 27 because that is what the fire department has indicated that they need for this station. So I know 16 is required, but 27 is what they need in order to make this development work. Yeah, and happy to answer any questions you guys might have during this development.
Who controls the easement that we're having this discussion with?
The easement is for the benefit of the daycare.
Who controls it though? Is it on your property?
It is on the fire station property. Yep. When you say control it, we have to provide that or get their approval to remove it, I would think.
Well, that's my next question. Have you talked to them about vacating the easement?
Yes. So there have been numerous calls to the daycare to try and get them to respond, but they are unresponsive and nobody is willing to talk about it.
So is it safe to say the lot is too small for what you want to put there?
I think we're able to make it with waivers. If you're saying without waivers, then, I mean, you can come to your own conclusions, right?
You don't need waivers if this is ministerial. You can build it as long as you don't have any waivers.
Correct. Yes.
So-
I think we can make this development work with the waivers and keep everything intact as well.
I have a question relating to the document that says area of critical root zone disturbances. It has the 4 large trees highlighted in yellow. There's 2 tables on there.
Yes.
Okay, there we go. The top table says critical root zone disturbance tables, but the bottom one says area affecting root ball zone. Now, I know you're not an arborist, none of us are. The arborist is not here. But root zone disturbance is different from root ball. Root ball is like where the tree itself is growing from. And we're looking at 19% disturbance on the one, you have these 4 large trees that are highlighted that you want to save, correct?
The 4 highlighted ones are the ones that are showing that we are above the 25% industry standard by total disturbed area. The area affecting the root ball zone, what we were trying to show there was the root ball itself is 18 to 24 inches. That's where maximum air and water moisture content is best for a tree to grow. So when you look at those 4 trees and what we are cutting on the north side of that, of the building, of the pavement, of all of that, we're cutting less than the 18 inches there. And that is where you get those percentages.
And what is the percentage again that is deemed acceptable as far as root zone and root ball damage?
The arborist indicated 25% is industry standard.
And on the root zone, we've got all of them are above the 25%, correct?
No, they're less than
I'm seeing
25%.
37%, 26.
No, that's total disturbed areas in the
Okay.
critical root zone. So I was just showing, hey, we're doing all this construction around these trees. This is how much percentage we're going to be disturbing land around those trees within their critical root zone areas, the yellow circles in that exhibit. When you actually look to see where we're cutting, and the only critical cut that we're making is that pavement and the building. And that then gives you those percentages on the bottom table. So where the roots will be affected, that is what the percentages will be, which is essentially what the 25% industry standards is talking about.
I also have a question, going back to the suggestions from staff, again, understanding that staff they're not design engineers, or these are just suggestions that they were making. If we could go back, is it the petitioner's position that those suggestions, and keeping in mind that these are just trying to find ways to make this work, are unacceptable?
The driveway cuts are, from what I understand with the fire department, are unacceptable because a lot of time they will bring out all of the trucks at the same time. So I don't know how you do that with what they're showing on the west side of the apparatus bay.
Okay.
That's the issue. And then when you extend it further out and then try to taper it, you create turning radii that are just too tight for a ladder truck to make, essentially. I've kind of done the same analysis, and they've thrown me to the wolves.
Okay. Are there any further questions for petitioner? If you'd like to have a seat, we will take questions from remonstrators. Mr. Guckenberg will be keeping track of time. Do we have anybody signed up to speak on this item?
We have two that have signed in, Lori Ralston.
Okay.
Good evening. I want to thank you for the opportunity to come and provide some input on this issue. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Sit back a little.
we need your name and address, please.
Lori Ralston, 1311 South Avon Avenue, Avon. So I live in the property that's just to the north of where the planned fire station will be, the one that has all the trees on the border that we've spent a lot of time here talking about. I'd like to say that I am supportive of the fire station and the fire department in Avon. You know, obviously they do a great job, and I have definitely seen, having lived here 40 years, the growth that we've seen in the town, especially lately. So I understand that we do need a new fire station. As far as being the neighbor right next door to it, at first I wasn't as excited knowing the noise and the light and everything that will come in a 24/7 operation, but I am okay with that fire station being there. My concerns, though, relate to the fact primarily about waiver A, which is asking for the 30 feet required setback to be reduced in half to 15 feet. And my concerns relative to that are really around the noise. I know you've had several discussions here about the noise, but I do think that the further away that the fire station is from our property, and the more opportunity to put landscape buffering in there that would reduce the noise and the light, would be conducive to allowing us to have, you know, that more of that privacy and more of that quiet. And I am also concerned about the trees and the impact that it would have on the trees. And as you've seen in that picture, that is a long line of trees along our driveway there in the southern side of the property. Most of them very, very large trees, catalpa trees. And I think the further away, obviously, that we can stay from their root structure and from their foundation structure, the better chance we'll have of being able to preserve those trees. And we have expressed, we've had meetings with Paul and also with the fire department and with Chad, and we are willing to work with them on different ideas for that and on maintenance of the trees. But again, we really would ask that we try to come up with a solution that allows us to stick with the requirements for the 30-foot setback, the landscaping plan that they've submitted. So we request that we don't have that waiver. I do agree. I think part of the problem we're seeing here, which someone brought up, is that the size of the property and its location is what is causing a lot of the problems here. It's a small lot on a very busy street next to an access road for a quite large subdivision. So I understand the challenges in being able to design that, but I also would request that, we keep it to the requirements of the town which are in that to protect a residential property from a commercial use like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Raleigh Ralston.
I'm Raleigh Ralston, and I live on the property just north, which if you've seen signs in front of our property, it's the Gossett Farm, the original one from 1831, 1832. And the house is still there. So is the base for the Wesleyan Church, which is where they held services back in the 1830s. I did want to reiterate or mention Paul, he talked about the trees. I want you to understand the trees some of them are theirs, some of them are ours. And so they're talking about trees that are basically a mix of who owns them. And I think we've kind of had a gentleman's agreement on what we're going to try to do with some of the trees. We don't have a problem removing a few of them. What I don't like is we don't have anything, a firm agreement in writing as far as who's going to pay for them. The arborist who's going to come out and take care of them, because if you start whacking on one side of the tree, you're overloading the other side of the tree. And I think we still need to get that worked out. And we're not at that point yet. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion going back and forth, and I do applaud him for talking to us and Paul for helping on some of this. I want to mention something that you asked, Catherine, is on the dimension of the trees versus the root zone. That is not a standard. Different people have different numbers. We've had an arborist come out too, and our arborist used to be the boss of the one that they had come out. And he said, yeah, you can use 8 times the tree diameter, 12 times the tree diameter. He says it's kind of a fluid number that people use just to get an idea where you are. But so when they say the zone is this big, it could be bigger, it could be smaller, and it is not exact. It's just a number to get you in that ballpark. I want to use some of the Paul's maps. Can you navigate? Sure. I want to show the one where you show the parking on the east side of the building. If you notice, he's got about 5 or 6 spots on the east side of the building. Paul also had another map, which I liked even better, where the parking spaces were on the west side of the easement. And you can get even more therein. So there's a lot of room on the west side, and people won't have to be backing out into traffic for coming out of the day car. The only thing, they won't have to worry as much, but there is another option there that Paul had come up with. I also want to talk about some of the sidewalk stuff. Paul pointed out that the sidewalk in front of the building is cement. We could remove that, or they could. It's not required, and they could put in a mulch path if they want people to get in and out of the building to improve the drainage. I also sent some stuff out today to Paul and to Chad about definitions of permeable and impermeable surfaces. And the EPA, which I sent them today, recognizes cobblestone and paving blocks as permeable surfaces, and they could convert a lot of the sidewalks, their outside areas that are walkways, or even in the parking lot, they could convert those to what the EPA says is permeable surfaces with paving stones or cobblestones. There's 4 or 5 states that recognize that. Rhode Island is an example, Connecticut, New Hampshire, they recognize those as permeable surfaces. Chicago does, New York City, the city of Honolulu does, because they have such drainage problems. So the cities are doing this too, because they're having more and more drainage problem and they're converting stuff. I've sent pictures to Chad and to Paul, what Chicago's doing as far as adding more, instead of having sidewalks or streets that are solid pavement, concrete or asphalt, they are converting more and more of them to cobblestones if the load is correct, which may not be for a fire truck, but the parking lot could be a cobblestone. They're converting more and more of their streets and their sidewalks, areas around houses to cobblestones and paving stones to increase drainage. I don't know if you ever saw the thing, Paul, that I sent you today. Did you mention that possibly parts of the building could be crawl space type of construction that would be considered permeable surfaces, like sleeping areas? I don't know if you have gotten to that. I mean, there's areas that are there that you can create more permeable space. And we were trying to come up with a lot of ideas. Paul had some good ones. I've thrown out some. Chad's had some. And I think you can get there. I think you can get there with the permeable surfaces that you need to increase in order to get more parking. And there are options as far as parking too, which Paul has pointed out several. I also want to point out, yeah, it shows there where the entrance to the daycare is way at the back of the lot. If you move it more towards the front of the lot, then they don't need as long of a two-way street.
We're at 2 minutes, sir.
Okay. I got 2 minutes left?
No, no, you've reached your 2 minutes.
Okay. But I think there's areas that you could improve stuff on as far as getting more permeable surfaces.
Thank you. Is there anybody else signed up to speak?
We don't have anybody else? No.
We don't.
No, no one else signed up.
Is there anybody present who would like to come forward and speak on this agenda item? Having nobody come forward, the public comment section for this agenda item is closed. Discussion. I'm sorry. Oh, thank you. I do this all the time. Would the petitioner like to provide rebuttal?
I just wanted to kind of comment. I heard, we could shift the building 15 and it'll reduce noise a little bit more. The landscape plan that we are currently showing meets the landscape buffer requirement. So there's not going to be additional trees added to help that noise mitigate. We meet the requirements with those numbers. So I guess I just want to make that clear. As far as the removal agreement, I feel like we're at a place where we could go with that, but again, I think there's just more conversations that maybe we need to have with the neighbor to the north. The permeable pavers, I mean, that just comes down to, the town of Avon, their approved sidewalks. I don't know if that's like an ordinance requirement or something to that effect, but we're meeting the town of Avon's requirements essentially, and it's ADA compliant and all that stuff. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So happy to answer any other questions you guys might have. I don't know if it's a Q&A set.
The homeowner mentioned the trees somewhere on your property, somewhere on their property. Have you identified which tree is on whose property yet?
Yeah, so if you look at the landscape, I don't know if you actually can see it on this image, but there's a good chunk of those that are on our property, but we are planning not to remove in good faith with the neighbors, to try and protect those, keep the buffer, add the trees while maintaining the intent of the design of the fire station as well? That's a good question.
But you don't have anything in writing.
I've got the arborist tree report that shows the locations. We put them in on our survey.
Agreement with the homeowner.
Yes, no, we do not have an agreement with the homeowner.
I
Correct.
think that's critical. I look at this, there's two neighbors. One's here and one's not. Sounds like one they can't get a hold of, but with that being said, the easement is on your property.
Correct.
So I'm assuming could be some legal way that you could get their attention.
You would think yes, but for whatever reason, they're not picking up the phone or talking to us.
Well,
From what I
there'd be
understand.
another way besides picking up the phone or talking to them, something in writing or.
Yeah, I'd have to talk to
I'm not an
the owners.
attorney,
Yeah,
so,
I'm
but
not.
I guess my point is, that's probably one of the biggest issues that we need to get resolved in the tree line. And so there's got to be some way to get in touch with the daycare. Because everything that we seem to have asked as an alternate plan keeps getting shot down. And like I said earlier, this is a compromise. This isn't a you win all. And I haven't seen a compromise yet. And we're trying to figure out ways to compromise, but so I think there's still more work to be done on this. Certainly to get with the neighbor to the north, get something in writing so everybody's happy, and to talk with the daycare.
So I
And
guess-
so my position is maybe we table this until further discussion.
Why don't we go ahead and just move on to do you have anything else to add?
No, I was good.
Okay, then let's just go ahead and move on to discussion. I mean, I'm,
Greg, it's not anything to do with this development, it has to do with the daycare.
no, sir. No, sir. That time's passed. I noticed on staff's report, I was looking through here and, no problem with B or C, and I tend to agree with that. But looking on staff's report, let me get to the page. There, under waiver A, applicant must demonstrate compliance with the following, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different criteria. And I have question marks by 4 out of the 5, meaning that you just don't have enough information. If it was just one that there was a question about, I would say, well, maybe this can be finagled a little bit, but there's only one where the staff is completely concurs with the petitioner, and the rest, the answer is, we are unsure that this finding can be met, or would be met. And I think we've got a real problem with waiver A. I really wish the arborist was here, and I understand, people take vacations, I get that. But I think we've got a lot of issues relating to this. I also agree with Greg that, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of give on the part of the fire department or the petitioner. And I'm kind of wondering why they chose this particular piece of land. I like the location. I think the location is good, but I'm not sure it's adequate for this purpose without some significant waivers. And again, I see a lot of problems with waiver 1.
So I support and agree with staff's assertions in waiver A that they don't meet the conditions for that. And I can't support changing what staff has recommended. I would support staff's recommendation on that if they don't meet waiver A. Also feel like, as we were discussing that, it seems like there's an attempt, location may be good, but trying to squeeze the fire department into a site that isn't quite large enough to meet the needs. I don't like the idea of reducing the buffer zone. We always have a lot of discussion around buffers, and with, this isn't a 24/7 operation, but there's a lot of traffic. If it's not a fire, then the fire department's responding to medical emergencies, which they do an excellent job, having been a recipient of those services. So, so we want to make sure that they have what they need. And I understand about the driveway, and I respect the fire department and look for them to tell us what they need there, and for us not to try to minimize that. So while staff's design, I think, admirable and trying to come up with alternatives, I really look for the fire department to tell us what they need to be able to service the community. But as far as like, yes, again, waiver A, I agree with the staff here, and maybe this location isn't the right size that's needed for what they're looking for.
Question for staff. Is it your feeling that you need more information, or that you just don't feel like it's that the request, that the criteria for waiver A have been met? Part of me feels like we need more information.
Yeah, I mean, one of our concerns that I think we noted in the report is that we don't have, again, as I mentioned, if they're going to do anything that's going to impact or remove existing trees, they're required to submit a tree preservation or a tree survey and replacement plan if they're planning to take down trees. That's one of the difficult spots we've been in as we go throughout this, is that at one time we thought they were proposing to take down 21 of the 24 existing trees when they submitted the arborist report that identified, all those red dots as trees that should be removed. At other times after that, they told us they didn't plan to take down any trees, which would be good. But when we know that the building is going to be 15 feet from the property line, and some of those trees are 3 to 4 feet wide, and that the critical root zone around those trees arguably extends 30, 40 feet plus, putting the building 15 feet from the trees is obviously going to significantly impact, or at least based on the information we have, it seems that those trees would be significantly impacted. And so then at that point, if you reasonably think that those trees are either just going to have to be cut down, or they're going to be damaged so badly that they're going to die and need to be cut down, then it gets to that point where the ordinance requires that they submit a tree survey and replacement plan that's prepared by a landscape architect or other design professional who stamps that and says what needs to be removed and what can be preserved. And it lays out the methods of protection for how the preserved trees would be protected. And it maybe even gives us an assessment or a prediction of if A, B, C, and D are done, then trees 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, and 15 should all be able to survive, but maybe 13 and 14 need to be removed. But we don't have that at this point. So, we've tried to be, deliberative and reasonable in our review throughout the process, and try to find if there's a solution that works for everybody. But we feel like it wouldn't be appropriate for us to recommend approval at this point with a lack of a tree plan stamped by a design professional that really gives us a level of confidence in which trees should be preserved and not die as a result of the construction impacts, and which ones really maybe are affected too much and need to be removed.
Is it your understanding, because I'm looking at the tree survey, and it's identifying 20-something trees, and it's talking about the condition that do you have any understanding as to whether we recommend removing these just because they're in poor condition and they should be removed, or we recommend removing these as part of the plan for for developing this space. I guess that's what, I don't understand this tree survey.
Well,
It feels like it's disconnected from whether or not it's part, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of trees in that area that should come down because they're in that stretch because they're just not in good shape. But is that actually something that is related to this petition?
Well, that's a question that we asked when we received this tree survey that recommended that 21 of the 24 trees be removed, and that all but 2 of those 21 recommended for removal were indicated as because of tree condition. So that's why we asked for more detail on the particular problems with those trees. And I do believe Chad put some mention in an email that was apparently from his arborist detailing a little bit, but we didn't get anything as far as in a plan substantiating that. And it would seem that some of the trees that are recommended for removal due to tree condition would overlap with the ones that would have the most impact to their critical root zones. But yeah, we didn't get a lot more information substantiating the condition. That might be a question for petitioner.
Is it staff's opinion that if you received this report, you might change your recommendations depending upon the contents of that report?
I mean, we're certainly open to looking at any new information. As I think we've indicated in our report, I mean, we think it's possible that the tree line could be preserved. We just can't hypothetically say what a stamped plan from a landscape architect is going to say. But if we were convinced that, these trees wouldn't be significantly impacted, we'd certainly be open to supporting a reduced buffer yard, as I think we've tried to indicate all along to the petitioner.
I'm also confused by the original tree survey versus then the later table. Is the intent to want to remove 21 of 24 trees, or is the intent to be worried about the critical root zone? Because like tree number 401 in that first report says that it's in fair condition, but recommends removing it because of construction impact. But then in that other table in the bottom, it's indicating that it's 19.8%, which is less than the 25% that was indicated was the standard. So what's the recommendation? What's the proposal there? I'm not sure I follow.
Other thing too is like, and we have the letter that was on our desk when we came in, and Ms. Ralston talked to this, I believe it was her letter too, that when it was rezoned, there was a commitment to a buffer zone, and now we're reducing that. And there's indication that they're willing to work together with the fire department to address that, to come up with a good plan. But until a better plan is in place, I can't support reducing the buffer area. And I agree with staff and would support their recommendation to deny the waiver.
Do we want to give the petitioner an opportunity to present the tree report, or what was it called? The arborist report? Which apparently that's the critical thing that's missing, correct? Or it's an important piece that is missing.
I think you have two pieces. You have that, and then you have your agreement with the neighbor of identify whose tree is who, and they have it in writing. And I think you get those two pieces and you can move this down the road.
I have a question about the arborist report. Will that include protections during construction for the trees that do remain? To protect compaction and heavy equipment moving along those trees and breaking limbs and things like that? Will that be part of that report?
So just so we're clear on what the UDO requires for development plans, 6.3D indicates that all applications for an improvement location permit or development plan review that require tree removal must include the following: a tree survey plan, including A scale map prepared and sealed by registered landscape architect, registered land surveyor, or licensed professional engineer. And I'm not going to read everything that it requires at that point, but that's what the ordinance requires. You know, I don't know where a landscape architect and an arborist sit on the scale of who's more of an expert. But that's what the UDO requires. So that's what we've indicated to the petitioner that would be required. But from a substance standpoint, what we're looking for is a design professional who is willing to put their stamp on a tree survey and preservation plan indicating, you know, how trees would be protected and preserved, which ones they would predict, giving us their professional, putting their, you know, professional opinion on the line that if we do A, B, C, and D, then trees, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, and 8 should all be able, you know, to survive.
The attachment B, certification of performance, doesn't meet that qualification.
Well, that's from an arborist. Also, I don't have it in the overhead or in the presentation here, but in the staff report where the arborist tree survey is submitted, I would refer you to page 18 of the staff report. It does indicate on there a tree, number 8, a tree risk assessment was not performed as part of this project. So I would interpret that to mean that the arborist isn't making any assessment as to whether these trees, you know, are going to survive or not based on the proposed construction.
And that's
activity.
what the ordinance requires, is a report saying exactly that.
Well, what the ordinance requires is, I think, more so an inventory of trees that are there. So if let's say the trees covered half of the property, and so they would have to cut down significant trees to develop the site for anything, regardless of what they were looking to put there. In that case, the ordinance is looking for a tree survey, counting up the trees that are there, an inventory of which trees are going to be removed, and then a plan of where those are going to be replaced, as the ordinance requires tree replacement when you remove existing trees. This situation is a little bit more unique because the existing trees are outside of, you know, at least the trunks of the trees are outside of the footprint of where the development will occur. So the petitioner has indicated at times that they don't think that they'll need to remove any of the trees. They can all stay. But we're trying to, as I said, be deliberate and reasonable in reviewing the development plan. And from the information that we have, it seems pretty reasonable, especially looking at the impacts, you know, this plan here, where you can see how much of what presumably is the critical root zone that lies underneath where the building's going to go. Here it's under the driveway. Here it's under the driveway. Here I think it's carved in for maybe drainage improvements. Although the drive pavement behind there goes back there too. When we look at that and we see these numbers in the top table, you know, from the limited information we have, it doesn't seem reasonable to think these trees are going to be protected. Now, you know, certainly as a commission, you can decide, hey, maybe those trees should go and we're fine with a waiver for a 15-foot yard and we're fine with those trees being removed. That's certainly within the discretion of the commission. But if there's a consensus that those trees are going to be significantly impacted, which the information we have at this point leads us to believe they are, then, you know, we should be clear about what that impact is going to be as we move forward. And given that we think there are reasonable alternatives, again, we're not saying this is exactly how you design the site or this is exactly how you design the site, but given it seems that there are some reasonable alternatives to putting the building 15 feet from the property line, which also, you know, didn't get mentioned, but would include maybe I know we've heard that it's difficult to get a hold of the property owner to the east, but they seem to have certainly an oversupply of parking that doesn't get used. Maybe there could be an agreement to use some spaces over here. Since it seems there's a lot of alternative options, it seems like it would be, perhaps negligent on our part to recommend approval when the information we have leads us to believe those trees will be significantly impacted.
So are we talking about continuance of this, or if not, I'd be glad to make a motion on waiver A.
I think it's judicious to ask that we be provided the information that staff had requested. I think asking, and I agree with you, Greg, that getting more information about a agreement between the property owner to the north and the developer and the petitioner. I would like to see those two pieces of information, have staff take a look at an arbor or a landscape report that gives more information about this. I'd like to give the petitioner, we support our fire departments, and obviously, I feel like we should try and do everything we can to support our first responders and their need for facilities. So I would like to suggest that we continue this out so that the petitioner can provide that information to staff and see if that changes the recommendation.
Well, if we continue this, one thing I'd ask petitioners to work really hard on the buffer yard. I have a hard time supporting reduction in the buffer from 30 feet to 15 feet. That would be my request to the petitioner as part of that.
Yeah, I would like to see some more give on that too as well.
I'll make a motion. I move that we continue DPR 2412 Washington Township Fire Department Station 145 to the October 28th Plan Commission meeting.
I have a question. Would petitioner be more comfortable with a 30 or 60-day continuance? I want to give you time to pull together what you need.
We could do 30.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Having heard a motion and a second, we'll now take a vote.
Ransburg,
For?
Guckenberger,
4.
Reed. 4.
Spencer, Zuzen,
4.
Kaufman,
4.
Rockabrand.
Okay. Motion carries. This agenda item will be moved to the October 28th meeting. Is there any other business? Looks like December meeting date.
So you are gonna have a calendar passed out to you that shows December. And the hearing dates that you approved probably late last year show the Plan Commission meeting on the 23rd. You'll see that's immediately following a holiday or a weekend, and then just before 2 holidays for the town. I will not be here. I'm not sure about the rest of you, if you planned on being at that commission meeting. Our suggestion to you is to move it 1 week earlier to the 16th. That is a redevelopment commission hearing date, but they meet a half hour before your time. We believe that typically they're done quickly, but if there's going to be more business, we can move them up a half an hour to not have that conflict, or they can meet in an alternate room in the building. We believe that our cutoff deadlines that are earlier into November and October to make it to this hearing can stay the same, because there's an extra week with the calendar falls. There's an extra week in between our technical advisory committee and plan commission. So we still have enough time for complete review before the commission.
So you're suggesting moving the Plan Commission meeting from the 23rd to the 16th?
Correct. Just like to know your thoughts on that, and if or an alternate date if you have issues with that date.
Anybody object to moving it to the 16th?
I mean, I think I would say that redevelopment commission usually does take more than 30 minutes. It's a pretty short meeting often because a lot of times it's a lot of invoices, but I think it still usually goes longer than 30 minutes. So we would probably need to do something with that.
And we also could pause this meeting so that those of you that are on that commission can make it over if it runs over a little.
What about typically there's BZA, there may be BZA cases that pertain to plan commission cases. So would it be better to do plan commission after the BZA meets, like on the 18th as opposed to the 16th?
Sometimes that does happen, not all the time. I'm not aware of any that have had any pre-file meetings yet that would be in that situation. I mean, if it did present itself, they would just have to go to the next month.
I'm fine with it.
Do we need to vote on this?
You did approve your schedule at late last year, and Bill came up with the schedule, so maybe that was his.
Would anybody like to make a motion to move the December Plan Commission date from the 23rd to the 16th of December?
I'll go and make that motion to move the December 23rd planning commission meeting to December 16th.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, December meeting is moved from December 23rd to the 16th at 6:30. And if necessary, we will delay the meeting to allow for the redevelopment commission to finish their business. So, okay, committee reports. BZA. We did have a meeting. We did have a meeting. Didn't come prepared for that.
You're not the scribe.
Redevelopment, invoice approvals in addition to invoice approvals, updates offered regards Dan Jones Phase 3 was one of them. County Road 100 South update, in addition to Dan Jones Road update. Change orders for Dan Jones Phase 1, change orders 3 and 4. For Phase 2, change orders 1 and 2. Resolution approved for right-of-way resolution for County Road 900 East and Angelina Way. And another resolution for authorization to proceed with condemnation on County Road 900 East. And a look at the 2025 budget approval and approving a quote for prairie planting and preservation for Ronald Reagan Parkway. That's all I got.
Okay. The BZA, just remember, the BZA did hear a petition from the Avon School Corporation regarding the moving of the sign for Avon High School, do the construction, and there was a request for a waiver with regards to the size of the sign, and we had a hearing, and that was continued out to next month to allow the petitioner to bring more information. So, any other committee reports? Town council? Is there anything for the good of the order from staff? In that case, meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.